Hey everybody, welcome back to SUSECON Digital 2020. My name is Chris Lantrichia. Hope you're enjoying SUSECON Digital 2020. I regret that obviously we couldn't be together in person, but hopefully you can grab a Guinness and listen to this presentation in the background. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Kubernetes distributions, in particular what they are in the first place and why you would even want one. So let's dig into it. This presentation is mainly for people who are in IT operations and know that they will need to adopt and maintain container orchestration technology of some kind. It also assumes that you have some prior technical knowledge and that you've begun investigating Kubernetes on your own. You may also be trying to decide whether you require a commercial distribution to implement Kubernetes inside your enterprise. These are not hard and fast prerequisites, just guidelines. So what's the whole point of my presentation today? My entire presentation can be summed up in a very, very simple saying. If there's one thing you take away from this presentation today, it's this, that do it for me is easier than do it yourself. That's the entire point of my presentation. Do it for me is easier than do it yourself. That's why you want a Kubernetes distribution. So to reinforce that, let's start with an overview of Kubernetes in plain English. Then we'll go into the do-it-yourself method with something called vanilla Kubernetes. You may have heard that term thrown around out there in the wild, but let's break it down a little bit into normal people talk. Let's talk about requirements for enterprise adoption and some pros and cons of vanilla Kubernetes and why you might need something called a Kubernetes distribution. We're going to lay out what a Kubernetes distribution is, and then we're going to use our Kubernetes distribution, SUSE platform, as a backdrop to that definition. Firstly, let's talk about Kubernetes. Kubernetes is a container orchestration technology that automates many of the processes involved with deploying, managing, and scaling containerized applications. Kubernetes is all the rage nowadays. You may have heard it out there in the wild more than once. I'm assuming you have. In fact, in 2019, Aqua Security and Portworx conducted a survey, and they found out that 87% of companies, they surveyed, said they were running container technology. And that number was up from 55%, or that number was up 55% from the year earlier, And of the 87% who said they were using container technology, 90% mentioned that they're running container technologies like Kubernetes in production. And in 2018, Datadog found out that 32.5% of all companies they surveyed were using self-managed Kubernetes as their container technology of choice. As for development, there were about 2,206 active contributors as of July of 2019. So this technology is growing almost infinitely, and it doesn't look to be slowing up. So how was this created? Well, the technology was originally created by Google as an outgrowth of virtualization technology. It's important to make a distinction between virtualization technology and Kubernetes, that one doesn't necessarily overlap the other. Out in the wild, you may hear Kubernetes referred to as K8s. If you want to be really cool, you can use that jargon too. Let's talk about vanilla Kubernetes. Vanilla Kubernetes can be thought of as the IKEA of Kubernetes. It's 100% open source Kubernetes. It doesn't cost anything. It's the stuff you can go download straight from GitHub. You're going to get all the normal functionality of Kubernetes, and you're not going to lose anything. It's no frills, basic Kubernetes. Vanilla Kubernetes is backed by a foundation called the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation is a nonprofit that overlooks the development of Kubernetes. Now, it is important to mention that vanilla Kubernetes is self-supported. So if you encounter an issue with your download of Kubernetes, it will be up to you to crowdsource that. Now, there are Slack channels, forums, email lists, etc., to help you do that, but you will have to crowdsource the answer to your problem, and that is one downside. Now, is it easy to set up and use? The answer to that really depends. Sorry to be that guy who puts that answer out there, but it does. Depends what you're trying to use Kubernetes for. It could be simple, and it could be really, really, really complicated. That's only half the story. If you want to create a complete Kubernetes environment, you may also need a bunch of different components. You might want a container runtime. You might want a registry. You're going to want a container execution environment. You're going to need to think about security. Maybe you want some storage. Maybe you want some monitoring and observability tooling. Again, that's all open source. You could go just download it online. It will be completely self-supported. You'll have to crowdsource everything, but you could do it. So that's not so complicated, right? You download Kubernetes and you go download some additional tooling and you have Kubernetes. You know, doing it for yourself is not so complicated. Here's where it gets complicated. If you want container runtimes, you can find these in this little box in something called the Cloud Native Computing Landscape. Now, the Cloud Native Computing Landscape is a visual representation of all the Kubernetes-related technologies that are within the purview of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Again, if you want to find container runtimes, you can find them over here in this little box. Now, it's up to you to track the development of those individual projects and figure out which one is going to be best for you. Again, not so complicated, right? Well, if you want some container registries, you can find those in this box over here. Keep in mind, again, that you're going to need to track the development of all of those components. Also, the container register that you choose may not work with the container runtime that you've just chosen. So you're going to need to pay attention to that. If you want some storage, that's a slightly bigger box. Again, keep track of those. Make sure it works with your container registry and your container runtime. Say you want some automation configuration. It's right over here in this box. Again, track it. Make sure it works with all the other components. Security and compliance, same thing. By the way, if you have any problems with any of these pieces of software, you're going to crowdsource the answers for those. Networking, service proxies. What if you want some build tools? Those are over there. So you get the point, right? It gets a little wild. Now, you could still totally do this yourself. And if you can, all the more power to you. In that landscape that I just showed you, change is really the only certainty. So this was the cloud native computing landscape not too long ago. These were all the technologies in the purview of Kubernetes and the CNCF. Not too long later, it looked like this. Then it looked like that. Now it looks like this. The landscape changes often. Besides, if you do all this stuff yourself, you're going to need somebody to back it. You may need support. You might want help with things like installation. You might need help with maintenance. Maybe you want help with support, somebody to call if anything goes wrong. Now, that could be your buddy Joe down the hallway, or it might be you. Take your pick. Now, when confronted with all this, most of us are going to look somewhat like this guy on the screen right here. You're going to hit a wall. You have to choose all your different components. You have to support it all yourself. We're all going to look like that guy. Now, some people are totally capable of doing this all themselves, and that's great. All the more power to them. But most of us aren't going to be. We're going to be looking like this guy. And it's really important to highlight that what we're feeling is okay, and it's actually completely normal. All this stuff is really complicated. And it's so complicated, in fact, that there are entire companies that exist just to make sense of this world so you don't have to. That's why there are these things called Kubernetes distributions. Again, because do it for me is easier than do it yourself. So let's talk about the do it for me method. Those are distributions. So there are a lot of distributions out there, and they all bring different things to the table and combinations of technologies and services. You might best think of a Kubernetes distribution as a, quote, suite or collection of Kubernetes and Kubernetes-related technologies and services. Sometimes those suites or collections of technologies will overlap, and sometimes they won't. For example, a couple of distributions are adopting the open source container runtime called CRI-O, and some aren't. Some distributions include a container-specific OS, and some don't. Some of the companies behind those Kubernetes distributions will even help you install and get their distributions up and running, and some won't. In the best of these curated collections, all the different parts are rigorously tested for interoperability to ensure that they work well together. The key for you is finding out which distribution works best for your needs. Again, a Kubernetes distribution can be seen as a collection of Kubernetes and Kubernetes-related technology. Picking the right collection for you could be a little tricky. As you see on the image in this slide, there are a lot of Kubernetes distributions out there. This is an image of all the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, certified Kubernetes distributions. And there are still a couple of choices for you. But most companies will be more than happy to tell you why their Kubernetes distribution might be the right one for your needs. And there's us. We're all cool and official and stuff. Check us out. So let's talk about our Kubernetes distribution. Now, the purpose of talking about our Kubernetes distribution is not exactly to sell you on our Kubernetes distribution as much as it is to reinforce the definition that we just laid out of a collection of software to get you up and running with Kubernetes. So what is SUSECON platform? Well, SUSECON platform is an enterprise-ready Kubernetes-based container management solution used by application development and DevOps teams to more easily and efficiently deploy and manage containerized applications and services. Wow. That sounds like a bit of a slug. So let's break that down. Let's talk about what it means to be enterprise ready. And that really is what it means to have a collection of software. Remember that cloud native computing landscape we laid out a couple of slides earlier? This is an overlay of all the technologies SUSE works with across our portfolio. So let's check out something like observability and monitoring. See those little boxes in green up to the top right-hand corner of your screen? SUSECON platform ships with Prometheus and Grafana for monitoring and observability. It's important to note that the collection of projects included in SUSECON platform does change from time to time, as SUSE constantly monitors the best projects to use in our distribution. Now, every customer goes through a journey when embarking on any new project. And that's especially true today when every business is driven to transform and to change the way they do business and the infrastructures, environments, and software they choose to get there. The SUSE customer services journey is meant to simplify, modernize, and accelerate your journey to digitalization. And there are 4 phases: discovery, design, deploy, and optimize. This is our services suite to get you up and running with our Kubernetes distribution as efficiently as possible. And again, there are 4 phases: discovery, design, deploy, and optimize. During the discovery phase, you will discover the right open source solution for you to take the guesswork out of choosing open source solutions and to align business and IT objectives. During the design phase, you'll design a solution that can be easily deployed. You'll to simplify and accelerate your implementation, and to design a roadmap to avoid unnecessary pitfalls during deployment. From there, you'll deploy a solution with the right experts. You'll choose a flexible deployment package to simplify and accelerate implementation, to realize rapid ROI with fixed costs and packaged offerings. Lastly, optimize. So deployment isn't the end of the journey. As your business evolves, you're going to constantly need to keep tweaking your IT to ensure that your IT infrastructure continues to align with your business needs and objectives. So let's recap what we talked about today. Today we started with an overview of Kubernetes. And then we went into something called vanilla Kubernetes. And we talked about the do-it-yourself method, building a Kubernetes distribution with vanilla Kubernetes. Again, you can most easily think of vanilla Kubernetes as the IKEA of Kubernetes. Next, we talked about some disadvantages of using vanilla Kubernetes and requirements for enterprise adoption in order to bring Kubernetes to your business specifically. And then we talked about Kubernetes distributions and why exactly they were created, why they were created as reactions to the requirements for enterprise adoption. Lastly, we use SUSE CaaS platform to fit into that definition of a Kubernetes distribution. We talked about what SUSE CaaS platform is conceptually, and we also talked about it in terms of services and support offerings that are included in our collection of software. What are your next steps? If you're interested in learning more, we have a Container and Application Platforms Roadmap session, SUSECON Digital. We also have a free trial of SUSE CaaS platform. If you go to suse.com/CaaS, you can sign up for a free trial. This trial has no technological limitations whatsoever, so you can set it up in your real environment wherever you're going to be using SUSE CaaS platform. It is self-supported, but at the end of the free trial, you can also decide to continue on with your implementation of SUSE CaaS platform without having to uninstall anything and install it again. We also have a webinar series on suse.com/CaaS called How to Choose the Right Kubernetes Platform. In a lot of ways, that is going to be the 201 presentation of what I just went over. So that will be a little more technically in depth of what we talked about today. It's a great webinar series, and I highly recommend checking it out. Again, my name is Chris Lantricchia. Thank you for being present with me today, and thank you for attending SUSECON Digital 2020. Again, I regret that we couldn't be in person in Dublin to meet each other, but hopefully you were able to crack a Guinness on your own and listen to this presentation in your own time. If you want to get a hold of me, the easiest ways to do that are by email. It's christopher.lantricchia@suse.com. I realize that's a little bit of a long name for everybody. So you can easily get a hold of me on Twitter at @IamChipino. I'm usually there. That's probably one of the best ways to reach out to me. Just send me a direct message and we'll take it from there. Again, thank you for being present with me today, and enjoy the rest of your SUSECON Digital.